Scalpels and Secrets, Season 1, Episode 1. First Cut. At St. Luke Holy Hospital, every day began with impossible expectations. Lives hung in the balance, careers were built under pressure, and every decision mattered. Among the hospital's most promising surgical residents was Dr. Photina Samba. Photina moved through the hospital with confidence. She trusted her training, trusted her instincts, and rarely hesitated when action was needed. One morning, Photina reviewed a patient's scans alongside a senior attending. Photina looked closely at the images and said, "Something isn't right. I think there's a perforation." The attending studied the scan again before responding, "I didn't see that at first." Photina pointed toward the area of concern and said, "If we wait, this patient could deteriorate quickly." After another look, the attending nodded and replied, "Good catch, Dr. Samba. Let's get surgery ready." The patient was taken into surgery before serious complications developed. Elsewhere in the hospital, Dr. Inari Ousseni was finishing rounds. Like Photina, Inari was exceptionally talented. But where Photina relied on instinct, Inari relied on careful observation and patience. An elderly patient had spent days searching for answers. Inari sat beside the patient's bed and reviewed every detail of the case. The patient looked worried and asked, "Doctor, do you know what's wrong with me?" Inari offered a reassuring smile and said, "Not yet, but I think we're getting closer." Hours later, after reviewing test results and consulting with specialists, Inari identified a hidden cardiac condition that others had overlooked. The attending physician reviewed her findings and said, "Excellent work, Dr. Ousseni. This explains everything." Inari smiled and replied, "I'm just glad we found it." Although their methods differed, both women excelled, and despite the pressure of residency, they remained close friends. Later that evening, after a long shift, Photina and Inari met at their favorite late-night diner. Photina laughed and said, "One day we're going to be attendings, and we'll finally get some sleep." Inari laughed and replied, "I don't think attendings sleep either." Photina shook her head and said, "Then we're in trouble." Both women laughed. For a moment, the future felt bright. Across town, another physician was making plans of his own. Dr. Dennis Givens, one of the hospital's most respected cardiothoracic surgeons, led a meeting regarding a groundbreaking procedure involving chest-to-chest conjoined twins. As surgeons discussed the risks, Dennis remained calm and confident. One physician asked, "Do you really think this surgery can succeed?" Dennis folded his arms and replied, "I wouldn't be planning it if I didn't." The room fell silent. His confidence was difficult to ignore. At home later that night, Dennis arrived later than expected. His wife, Corinne Henderson Givens, sat reading documents in her home office. Dennis entered the room and said, "Long day." Without looking up, Corinne replied, "I can imagine." Dennis kissed her forehead before heading upstairs. Corinne finally looked toward the doorway. She said nothing, but she noticed everything. As another day ended at St. Luke Holy Hospital, none of them realized how quickly their lives would change. For now, the hospital remained calm. For now, friendships remained intact. For now, the future still looked exactly as they imagined. But that wouldn't last forever.
Scalpels and Secrets, Season 1, Episode 2. Pressure. At St. Luke Holy Hospital, pressure came in many forms. For some doctors, it came from impossible patients. For others, it came from impossible expectations. For Dr. Photina Samba and Dr. Inari Ousseni, it was beginning to come from somewhere neither expected: each other. Several weeks had passed since hospital leadership publicly recognized residents for their recent accomplishments. Life inside St. Luke had largely returned to normal, at least on the surface. Photina began a new trauma surgery rotation. The pace was relentless. Patients arrived around the clock, and decisions often had to be made within seconds. One afternoon, a construction worker was rushed into the trauma bay after falling several stories. The trauma team immediately surrounded him. An attending surgeon reviewed the scans and asked, "What do you think?" Photina studied the images for only a moment before responding. "I think he's bleeding internally. We need to get him upstairs." Another resident looked uncertain. "Shouldn't we wait for another scan?" Photina shook her head. "No. If we wait, we're going to lose time." The attending nodded. "Let's move." Hours later, the surgery was successful. As the team left the operating room, the attending stopped Photina. "You've got good instincts, Dr. Samba." Photina smiled. "Thank you, sir." Across the hospital, Inari was thriving in emergency medicine. A worried mother sat beside her teenage son. The boy had been experiencing symptoms that several physicians had dismissed. Inari listened carefully. She reviewed his chart. She reviewed his history. Then she reviewed it again. Finally, she looked at the mother. "I think we've been looking in the wrong place." The mother asked, "What does that mean?" Inari replied, "I think this may actually be a cardiac issue." Hours later, testing confirmed her suspicion. The grateful mother hugged her. "Thank you for not giving up." Inari smiled warmly. "We just needed to keep looking." As the weeks continued, both women excelled. But something had begun to change. Photina seemed to attract increasing attention from senior surgeons. Her name came up during meetings. Attendings requested her for difficult cases. More than once, she found herself receiving praise during rounds. One morning, a senior surgeon stopped her in the hallway. "I expect great things from you, Dr. Samba." Photina laughed. "Hopefully I don't disappoint." The surgeon replied, "I don't think that's possible." Across the corridor, Inari overheard the conversation. She said nothing, but she heard every word. Later that evening, Photina and Inari met for coffee after their shifts. Photina noticed her friend's mood. "You've been quiet all day." Inari forced a smile. "I'm fine." Photina raised an eyebrow. "No, you're not." After a moment, Inari sighed. "Do you ever feel like people only see one version of us?" Photina looked confused. "What do you mean?" Inari hesitated. "You're always the one people talk about." Photina laughed softly. "That's not true." "It kind of is." Photina leaned back. "Inari, you're one of the best residents in this hospital." Inari looked away. "Sometimes it doesn't feel that way." Photina reached across the table. "Trust me, you're doing better than you think." For a moment, the tension disappeared, but only for a moment. Meanwhile, in the cardiothoracic department, Dr. Dennis Givens gathered several physicians for a meeting. On the screen behind him appeared medical scans unlike anything most had ever seen. The conjoined twins. The room fell silent. One surgeon asked, "Do we really have a chance?" Dennis stared at the scans. "We do." Another physician replied, "It's going to be the most complicated operation this hospital has ever attempted." Dennis nodded. "Then we'd better be ready." As the meeting ended, several residents watched from outside the conference room, including Photina, including Inari. Neither woman knew it yet, but the surgery would change both of their lives forever. The pressure at St. Luke was growing, and the cracks beneath the surface were beginning to show. Scalpels and Secrets, Season 1, Episode 3, Impact. At St. Luke Holy Hospital, Disaster preparation was part of the job. Every doctor trained for emergencies. Every nurse practiced for mass casualty events. Everyone hoped they would never face one. On an otherwise ordinary morning, Photina, Samba, and Inari Ousseni arrived for another shift. Neither knew the day would become one of the most important of their careers. The emergency department was busy, but manageable. Patients filled exam rooms. Doctors moved from case to case. The hospital functioned like it always did. Then everything changed. A call came into dispatch. A charter bus carrying dozens of passengers had collided with multiple vehicles on the interstate. The injuries were extensive. The casualties were unknown. Within minutes, St. Luke activated disaster protocols. Overhead speakers echoed throughout the hospital. Mass casualty event. All available personnel report immediately. The atmosphere changed instantly. Doctors ran. Nurses mobilized. Operating rooms were prepared. Trauma teams assembled. The first ambulances arrived moments later, then another, then another. Soon the emergency department was overflowing. Patients covered in blood filled every available space. Families cried. Paramedics shouted reports. The noise was overwhelming. Photina immediately stepped into the chaos. A trauma nurse approached her. "We've got 3 critical patients and only 1 trauma bay available." Photina looked around. "Move the chest trauma patient to bay 2. Get surgery ready for the abdominal bleed." The nurse nodded. "What about the 3rd? Photina replied without hesitation. "CT scan now. We need answers." The team moved. Within minutes, another patient arrived. Then another, then another. Photina remained focused. One frightened elderly patient grabbed her hand. "Doctor, am I going to die?" Photina looked directly into the woman's eyes. "We're going to take care of you." The woman nodded. For a moment, she seemed calmer. Elsewhere in the emergency department, Inari worked just as hard. She assessed patients, ordered tests, coordinated treatment plans. Everything was under control. Until 2 young girls arrived, the sisters appeared terrified. One was crying, the other was unconscious. For a moment, Inari froze. The noise around her disappeared. The trauma bay faded. All she could see were memories. A car, rain, flashing lights, her sisters. The memories hit her harder than she expected. A nurse called her name. "Inari?" No response. The nurse called again. "Dr. Ousseni." Inari blinked. Reality slowly returned. The nurse looked concerned. "Are you okay?" Inari took a breath. Then another. Finally, she nodded. "Yes." The nurse asked, "Can you continue?" Inari looked toward the injured girls. Then she straightened her shoulders. "Yes, let's help them." Slowly, she regained her focus. Patient by patient, case by case, hour by hour, she worked through the remainder of the disaster response. By nightfall, exhaustion covered every face in the hospital. The worst of the crisis had finally passed. Days later, hospital leadership gathered residents and staff for a special recognition ceremony. The disaster response had saved dozens of lives. Several residents received praise for their efforts. Photina's name came up repeatedly. One attending stood before the group and said, "Dr. Samba demonstrated exceptional leadership during the bus disaster." Another added, "Her clinical judgment was instrumental in several critical cases." Applause filled the room. Photina smiled politely. Across the room, Inari joined the applause. But something felt different. No one had ignored her contributions. No one had questioned her abilities. Yet she couldn't stop comparing herself to Photina. For years they had stood side by side. Now, it felt as though a gap was beginning to form between them. Later that evening, Photina found Inari sitting alone. Photina sat beside her. "You disappeared after the ceremony." Inari shrugged. "I just wanted some quiet." Photina studied her friend. "You did great during the disaster." Inari looked down. "Did I?" Photina frowned. "What does that mean?" Inari forced a smile. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. For the first time, jealousy had found a place inside their friendship. Neither woman knew it yet. But the bus collision had changed more than the lives of the patients who arrived that day. It had changed them, and the consequences were only beginning. Scalpels and Secrets, Season 1, Episode 4. Crossing Lines. 3 months had passed since the interstate bus disaster. At St. Luke Holy Hospital, life had returned to its usual rhythm. Patients continued arriving, residents continued competing, and the distance between Photina Samba and Inari Ousseni continued to grow. Neither woman spoke about it, but both could feel it. One morning, excitement spread through the hospital. The long-awaited separation surgery involving chest-to-chest conjoined twins was approaching. For months, physicians had prepared for the operation. Now the final stages of planning were underway. Doctors from multiple specialties gathered inside a conference room. Medical scans covered the screen. The room was silent. Everyone understood what was at stake. At the front stood Dr. Dennis Givens. He studied the scans before addressing the room. "This procedure will challenge every one of us." Several surgeons nodded. Dennis continued. "But if we succeed, these children will have a future neither of them could have imagined." The room remained silent. The responsibility was enormous. Following the meeting, residents learned which members of the program would join the surgical team. Both Photina Samba and Inari Ousseni were selected. The opportunity was considered career-defining. Later that afternoon, Photina and Inari reviewed patient data together. For a brief moment, things felt almost normal. Photina smiled and said, "Looks like we're stuck with each other a little longer." Inari laughed softly. "Could be worse." Photina nodded. "Much worse." The tension between them had not disappeared, but neither wanted to completely lose the friendship. As preparations continued, Dennis spent increasing amounts of time mentoring members of the team. Inari often found herself assigned to work directly alongside him. Dennis challenged her thinking, questioned her decisions, expected more from her. Rather than intimidating her, it pushed her to improve. One evening after rounds, Dennis reviewed a case with her. He looked at the chart before asking, "What would you do?" Inari studied the information. "I'd operate." Dennis raised an eyebrow. "Immediately?" Inari nodded. "Immediately." A small smile appeared on Dennis's face. "Good." Inari looked surprised. Dennis continued. Most residents would have waited. As the weeks passed, moments like these became more frequent. Professional conversations became personal ones. Long shifts turned into longer conversations. Conversations turned into shared confidence. Neither acknowledged the growing attraction. Not at first. Finally, surgery day arrived. Before sunrise, physicians gathered inside the operating suite. The atmosphere was tense. Every member of the team understood they were about to participate in medical history. Hours passed, then more hours. The operation tested every surgeon involved. Complications emerged. Solutions followed. By evening, the impossible had become reality. The twins had been successfully separated. Celebrations spread throughout St. Luke. The surgery became national news. Photina was proud. Inari was proud. For one night, everyone shared the same victory. Weeks later, The hospital continued celebrating the success. Media interviews, medical conferences, recognition from across the country. During one late evening review session, Dennis and Inari remained in the hospital long after everyone else had gone home. The conversation drifted away from medicine. They spoke about their careers, their regrets, their ambitions, their fears. For the first time, neither spoke as attending and resident. They spoke as two people. Dennis looked at her. Inari looked back. Neither looked away. A boundary had been crossed. Neither could pretend otherwise. As they left the hospital that night, both understood that their relationship had changed. What happened next would affect far more than their careers. It would change everything. Scalpels and Secrets, Season 1, Episode 5. The Visit. Success changes people. Sometimes it changes them for the better. Sometimes it exposes who they already were. In the months following the historic separation surgery, life at St. Luke Holy Hospital continued moving forward. The hospital enjoyed national attention. The surgical team received praise. And behind closed doors, a secret relationship continued to grow. Dr. Inari Ousseni and Dr. Dennis Givens had become increasingly involved with one another. What had begun as mentorship had become something far more complicated. For Inari, the relationship felt real. For Dennis, it felt manageable. Neither understood how quickly that would change. One morning, Inari sat alone in a hospital restroom, staring at a pregnancy test. She looked down, then looked again. The result hadn't changed. She was pregnant. For several moments, she simply stared. A mixture of fear and hope washed over her. Later that day, she asked Dennis to meet privately. Inside a quiet consultation room, she delivered the news. Dennis remained silent. Inari finally asked, "Say something." Dennis looked away before answering. "I wasn't expecting this." Neither was she. But from that moment forward, something changed between them. Inari began imagining a future. Dennis began calculating consequences. Weeks passed. The distance between them slowly grew. Phone calls became shorter. Conversations became less frequent. Excuses became more common. Inari noticed every change. She told herself she was imagining things. But deep down, she knew she wasn't. One afternoon, Photina found Inari sitting alone in a staff lounge. "You okay?" Inari forced a smile. "I'm fine." Photina laughed softly. "You always say that when you're not." For a brief moment, the old friendship resurfaced. Neither woman knew it would be one of their last peaceful conversations. Several weeks later, tragedy struck. During a routine shift, Inari suddenly became ill. Doctors rushed her for evaluation. The news came quickly. The pregnancy was over. The loss devastated her. The days that followed blurred together. Inari returned to work sooner than she should have. She told everyone she was fine. No one believed her, especially not Photina. One evening, Photina found her sitting alone after her shift. The hospital around them had grown quiet. Photina sat beside her. "You don't have to do this alone." Inari stared ahead. "I'm handling it." Photina shook her head. "No, you're surviving it." Silence filled the hallway. Finally, Photina spoke again. "I think you should talk to someone." Inari turned toward her. "What?" "A therapist, a psychiatrist, someone." Inari's expression hardened. "You think I'm crazy?" "No." "Then why would you say that?" Photina remained calm. "Because you've been through something traumatic." The words landed badly, very badly. Inari stood. "You don't know what I'm going through." Photina stood as well. "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" Photina hesitated. I'm saying you're hurting. For a moment, it seemed the conversation might calm down. Instead, it exploded. Inari took a step back, then another. Finally, she said the one thing she could never take back. You just want Dennis for yourself. Photina stared at her, completely stunned. What? You heard me? Photina shook her head in disbelief. That's what you think this is about? Inari folded her arms. Maybe you've wanted him this entire time. The accusation hung in the air. Photina's expression changed. Not anger, not sadness, disappointment, deep disappointment. After a long silence, she spoke. I was trying to help you. Neither woman said another word. Photina turned and walked away. For the first time in years, their friendship was over. Days later, Dr. Dennis Givens prepared for an important procedure. Before surgery, an unexpected visitor arrived at St. Luke. His wife, Corinne Henderson Givens. She walked through the hospital corridors with quiet confidence. Staff greeted her politely. Many already knew who she was. As she rounded a corner, she briefly crossed paths with Inari. The encounter lasted only seconds. Neither woman stopped. Neither woman introduced herself. But Corinne noticed the name displayed on Inari's identification badge. Inari Ousseni. The name was familiar, very familiar. Corinne continued walking. Her expression never changed. She asked no questions, made no accusations, and revealed nothing. That evening, after returning home, Corinne entered her private office. She opened a locked drawer. Inside were records she had quietly collected for years. Dates, names, notes, patterns. Without speaking a word, she added a new entry. Then she closed the file. Elsewhere in the city, Dennis remained unaware. Photina remained hurt, and Inari remained alone. At St. Luke Holy Hospital, some wounds healed. Others did not. And some secrets were only beginning to surface, fade to black.